Welcome back to NostalgiaCast. I'm Darren Lundberg. Today we'll be covering Cape Fear, directed by Martin Scorsese, and also The Silence of the Lambs, directed by Jonathan Demme. We're kind of cheating this week. I'll explain a little bit why in a second. But again, Johnny's off this week. He's toiling away at his job, or he's working overtime to help support his family, whatever that's about. So, in his stead, to help me profile and dissect these two horror thriller behemoths, I've asked a man to join me who needs no introduction, but I'm going to introduce him anyway. He is my podcasting big brother in crime. He is the conscience of mine, the connoisseur of all things pop culture, and king of all you surveys. He is the one, the only, the Jason of Binge Movies podcast. How are you doing, brother?
Well, that's a hell of an introduction, buddy.
Well, you always give me the greatest introductions, or your guests the greatest introductions, so I'm half-assing it. Trying to do
this is the third time I believe I've appeared in this podcast.
That is true. There is Jurassic Park, which is an in-depth conversation. There was Captain America, Albert Kuhn's Captain America, which is a surprisingly in-depth conversation, and now another in-depth conversation.
Two of those have something in common.
Yeah.
Now. No Johnny.
No Johnny. That's right.
Where's Johnny?
He's doing the responsible thing. Instead of podcasting, he's off living his life and making money. That's the sad
like
thing.
Elder Bars once said, "Where's Johnny? Where's Johnny?" It's who's Johnny, but I think it's more appropriate to say, "Where's Johnny?" And for that matter, who's Johnny? I don't know. Does anyone really know Johnny? After all these years of doing NostalgiaCast, can you Lundberg say that you really know this man? Can any of us? What have we learned? What have we gained in him doing this show? What knowledge, what insight has he given us into who he is? He still remains a mystery.
He does. He's an enigma wrapped in a riddle. And that's a big part of why he's my co-host, or I'm his co-host, is just trying to figure that out. And so that's
just trying to find out who Johnny is.
Yeah, that is the mystery that we're trying to solve within each week.
Wow. So you just keep throwing nostalgic movies at him.
Yeah. This is
hoping that as he talks about them, it will unlock something.
So, yeah.
So far,
we'll be able to see that special, we'll see the Johnniness come through. Yeah, that's
the Johnniness. Yeah.
Yeah.
So far, nothing.
No, he's keeping up that facade. It's really impressive.
Wow.
One day I'll break. And what is this? Like 120 episodes, something like that?
That's what I'm saying, man. You guys are getting long in the tooth here, and we haven't gained what out of him. We don't know more about it. I think we know less about Johnny today than we did in episode 1, it feels like.
Well, that's why everybody tunes in, right? Just to find out, just to figure out.
He's the mystery box.
Yeah. So that's what we love about him. So we'll have to deal without him. So today, again, Jason, we're in the middle of our bucket list season, or actually the start of our bucket list season. What we're doing this season is we had so much fun talking about 90s movies a couple seasons ago that we wanted to do it again, but we didn't want to do it so randomly. And so we came up with the idea of, we kind of stayed away from movies that, like Jurassic Park would be one of them. Like everybody's talked about Jurassic Park. Like what can we add to it? Yeah. So, but then we have sublime guests like yourself that did come on and then could explain Jurassic Park. So that's one of the things that we're like, we can actually figure out new things to say about these movies. And so we had a whole bucket list of these titles that were like, I've always wanted to talk about this movie. I've always wanted to get on the record. And this one, there's a couple of cheats. Number one is, usually I didn't give the usual spiel. I didn't give you a list of things because we came down to the wire. And I was like, well, we're talking about this. Would you like to talk about this? So it's not really a bucket list movie, or bucket list couple of movies for you, but it is a bucket list conversation for me, as it always is with you. And so, again, it's kind of a cheat. We thought about doing 3 movies a year. We're covering this every year for the whole decade. And to do 3 was way too many. And to do 2.
Oh, really?
It just seemed like, what? It's like a 3 times 10. Yeah, that's a huge.
Yeah.
No, 6 times 10, because each of us would do 3.
Yeah.
So it's like a 60-episode season. So just to kind of cut back, we did 2. So I'm cheating today. I initially wanted to talk about Silence of the Lambs. It's a movie that I've watched and loved for, 34 years, something like that. And then, but, again, Silence of the Lambs is one of those movies that everybody knows, everybody talks about. And so I thought it was interesting. There's another movie that came out in 1991 that kind of had the same kind of attitude, or the same kind of modus operandi. We have these 2 American directors who aren't typically known for making horror movies that made full-on horror movies in 91. And I think made enough of a pop cultural impact that it kind of meant something. But yeah, you got Scorsese, you've got Demme. So kind of to back up into that conversation with Silence of the Lambs, I thought, well, nobody ever talks about Cape Fear from
Very
Martin
rarely.
Scorsese. So,
Yeah.
and I think it's a movie that stayed with me since I saw it in the theater. I
Yeah.
rode I rode my bike to the theater to
Wow.
watch Cape Fear. And I don't know
Wow.
how my baby face, I was only what, like 14, 15.
27?
Yeah,
Oh.
something like that. I was able to get in.
Yeah.
But anyway, so that I have
They
really
let
strong
you in.
memories. They did. I think they've just really laxed some.
Wow. Yeah. It was a different era.
Yeah, since we don't drink or smoke in Utah, it's like, oh, he's got a really young face. That makes sense. He could be 45,
That's right. Yeah.
even though he's only
And
14.
Asian?
Yeah, half Asian.
Who knows?
So
This guy could be 50.
yeah, clear skin.
Yeah.
So they let me
Yeah, that's
ride
right.
it. So yeah, so I wanted to talk again. I thought it'd be an interesting conversation, and when I settled on that, I was like, well, who could I get to join us to talk about that? Again, the master of binge movies. And although instead of talking about 5 or a dozen movies, we're only talking about 2. I just thought that was kind of a
It's almost a vacation for me.
yeah, we're just taking it
Yeah.
easy on you this time.
Just
And
taking
then-
it easy. I think not to make it completely about me, but I think that I've accidentally developed this reputation of we're gonna watch disturbing movies uh that are real, maybe cerebral and also really perverted. Who can we get? Oh, there's that guy from Binge Movies. This is
Yeah.
his wheelhouse.
He'll talk about
Yeah.
anything.
Yeah, well, I believe I can talk about almost anything, but I think now the expectation is that no one's inviting me on to talk about Strictly Ballroom. I think between the two shows that I do,
Yeah.
one more sporadically than the other, I think now I'm like oh, we got some pervert movies. Get this guy on. Yeah, I guess I'm for the sickos, is what I'm saying.
Right. Well, pervert movies that cracked the top 10 box office back in 1991.
We're all perverts, Darren. I've been saying it for years. I'm
Right.
just open about it.
Yeah, no shame, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Is there anybody who's not a pervert? Is Martin Scorsese not a pervert?
Right. Well, isn't that what Fincher says? He just says people are perverts. That's his whole.
They are. We are.
Yeah.
And perversion is in the eye of the beholder.
Right. And speaking of perversion, we've got a lot of it for these 2 movies.
That's right.
So it's interesting because you actually covered these 2 movies a long, long way back. I think back in May and June of 2019 for your top films of 1990.
Might as well be a lifetime ago, thanks to COVID and everything
Seems
else.
forever ago, but I like it's great that they're archived so I could listen. Again, I'd message you as like, do you have the links? I want to be sure. And then I was like, oh, of course, he would have covered them in 1991. I'm ashamed to say that I never listened to the Silence of the Lambs episode. Let me ask you a quick question though, because now your format of the greatest, the top box office earners of each year, you go right in and you and your guests, like you talk about each one, like 10 through 6, and then you split it and you do. But back then you did something where you did a featured review of the week. And so for the first part, you did Addams Family, I believe, did your review. And then for your second, you did Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves.
Didn't like it.
Yeah, not at all, which is fine.
Yeah,
Robin Hood is
sorry,
interesting.
man.
I have the same.
Sorry.
It's great when you watch it in a theater, but when you watch it like 30 years after the fact, you're like,
Thanks.
oh, what
Yeah.
is this?
What is this? Yeah.
So, a couple of questions then. Number one, why did you end up changing the format to what it is now? And then, why did you decide to do Robin Hood as your featured presentation of that week? Was there a decision process?
Man, you're talking about a lifetime ago. Why? Why was
Paul was the host?
So,
Our dearly departed Paul, like he was your co-host back then.
yeah. The format change really came to back when we started the show. This is real boring, so fast forward to this, people. When we started the show, and then we're talking like 2014, 2015. And we've been kicking around since probably 2012 or maybe even before that. And before we got off our asses and did it. But like back then, the format of most like podcasts were pretty simple, especially in the movie space. And it was typically a couple of guys or a gang of guys sit around and review a movie. And they were typically kind of like, they were one of two things. They typically were tended to be kind of we're revisiting something from our childhood, and because we love it, right? Almost like fandom kind of a thing. Or people were doing kind of bad mystery science theater of we're going to get this, or I guess it would be bad. Um, how did this get made? You know, you get a bunch of people and they have a couple of beers and then you sit around and you talk about a movie and you kind of make fun of it.
Hmm.
And didn't want to do that because that's what everybody was doing and wanted to do something a little bit different. And at the time, you know, when we were getting all of these, there'd been already at that point so many reboots and sequels and franchises, and I was like, no, nobody at that time was really looking at them kind of in a big swath and saying, let's just look at an entire franchise at one time, or let's look at every sequel of a series of films at a time. That was less common at the time.
Hmm.
So that was the format, but we also kind of still wanted to adhere to podcast standards because nobody was doing that. And so we kind of, to be honest with you, kind of half-assed it. And so we'll give you that feature presentation review that you want, but we're also going to talk about the macro. And then I just got to a certain point where I didn't feel that was necessary, and I didn't feel it was as true to my convictions or interest. And then when Pat died, it became irrelevant what Pat wanted. So,
Right.
you know, there you go.
Yeah.
And then, also, you know, when we would ever get feedback from listeners, it was always like, well, why did you dedicate most of the episode to this movie when these are more interesting? It's like, so you're always, so it's like, well, maybe we should just review instead of having, you know, however it broke down, you know, I don't know, 30, 40 minutes in one and 20 minutes of a ranking or whatever it was, or maybe 45 and 45, I think is maybe how it broke down. You know, rather than do that, then okay, well, let's just talk about them all. But that, of course, the other thing too is that's like going to like double the length of the show episodes, which it has, right? So we've gone from having like an hour and a half average episode to probably 2.5 hour average episodes. So
Right. Well, again, it's always I don't want to say eye opener. That's like an ear opener. You're especially kicking off the season with your David Lynch episode with Molly Raspberry, your Criterion episode with Megan, Joey Batiste. You just had him on for John Milius. Like it's already. And again, I try to DM you compliments all the time, and you never take them, but I do it anyway. Listening to you and Megan and you and Molly talk, it's like, and I don't know, like I seriously wrote you, I'm like, you are able to cultivate conversations in a better way than Siskel and Ebert ever did. I know that's high praise, but Siskel and Ebert always had like this time limited. We only have like 22
that's
minutes
it.
to do all this
That's
stuff.
right. That's
and we've got to yell at each other equal time and whatever. So, but the way that you engage and your conversations that you had, the night to remember conversation you had with Megan about how the rich people just don't think that they can be affected by tragedy like this. It's like, wow, like we're talking about this for a Titanic and not the Titanic movie that everybody knows.
That's right. Yeah.
You're talking about probably my favorite Titanic movie, but it's still like, yeah, you don't expect those kind of conversations and to be engaged by those conversations. And so whether you're talking about Robin Hood or Addams Family,
well, I think that's it too. Like that's how the show has evolved and changed over time. And I think having guests, when you lose the permanent co-host and you have this rotation of guests, it opened the show up in a way, and then also it being COVID, just to say it kind of doesn't matter anymore. Just kind of say F it, you know. And this is what we're just going to have this, and so there's a lot less structure, a lot less formatting. It doesn't mean it's just a sort of a willy-nilly show, but there's a lot less. We're very much early on, very much trying to almost be more like Siskel and Ebert and get sound bites, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
And cultivate it and edit it in such a way to where you're really focusing. It was snappier and it moved better. And now the conversation, the episodes are more languid, I think, but they're a little bit more organic and a little bit more raw in that way.
Yeah.
And ironically, the show grew by like leaps and bounds once we broke the format.
Yeah.
And so most people seem to like it. But here on your episode, I have sworn to you I'm going to adhere to the syllabus you've given me. I haven't two times before, but I'm going to this time. I
Okay.
promise you.
Well, okay. Well, as long as you expound, that's all we really ask for. I think
Oh,
when you have conversations like, or any conversation, I personally don't think that you should just have where you get to espouse what you know and then move on and the other person does the same thing and that's it. I think a conversation should make your mind open a little more. It should make your eyes open a little more. I think a conversation that the quality conversations, you'll always end up a better person and a
mm,
more you can appreciate things more. And again, that's what every conversation with you does for me. It's what every
mm.
conversation that I listen to on Binge Movies. So again, I couldn't with
Well,
this batch of movies. I couldn't do
you're
it.
a contributor to that as well, you know.
Yeah.
And then you appeared in a semi-recent episode, depending on when this one comes out, where you talked about the 10 through 6 highest grossing movies of 2008, which included Iron Man and Prince Caspian or whatever. And
Right.
you know, I thought between you and your wife. And your wife was like, Wally is the plot of a Hallmark movie,
Yeah.
right? That was completely unexpected, and you can hear kind of in real time, like my synapses start firing. I go, yeah, that's right. Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Like it just starts to become clearer and clearer. She was spot on, and then you talked about Moses Plus or something as a Holy Land, you know. So
The parting the Red Sea pass is what it
yeah,
was.
that's right, yeah. And I just think like stuff like that comes out organically out of people, and you go, and maybe that ends up being 20 minutes of the conversation. And that's better than anything that we could maybe have in our notes, you know, because a lot of as much as I love and respect them, a lot of their stuff was they had a lot more free form conversation in the PBS era.
Right.
People thought it was boring because they were kind of stuffier, they were less comfortable on camera, and so when the producer, I forget her name, kind of built this format specifically to just like get to the point, get to the one or two snappiest lines out of your written reviews, because
Mhm.
that's where those guys excelled, and then just basically just rephrase them with each other, you know, and Ebert would talk a little bit and kind of give an overview of the movie, or Siskel would, and give their opinion, and they'd kick it over the other person, and then usually they'd fight. And that's the format that worked for them, right?
Yeah.
You know, and that worked. So the earlier episodes where they talked about a couple less movies an episode, and they would just sort of, well, Roger, you know, I think the thing about this is Truffaut and blah blah blah. Like nobody cared.
Yeah.
So I think because of the diversity of guests and the quality of guests I've been fortunate enough to have, and then enough of my mania, I think it just combines on our show in a way that I think the guests bring a lot of the secret sauce that makes the show work. So
Yeah. The nobody cares is the sad part about that. I love Siskel and Ebert. They were great at what they, but you're talking about sound bites. They need to get everything they need to say about the
yeah,
movie out in
that's right.
2 minutes.
Yeah,
And like Twitter with its limited characters, there's only
yeah,
so much you can do, and people might misread that. Again, a lot of people totally misread Ebert and Siskel, whatever they all hate horror movies or
not
they all
yeah,
hate
right,
these,
not true.
but
Yeah,
they were very nuanced. If you would go further than the show, if you could expand your attention span and
yeah, yeah,
read
right,
their reviews,
right.
then you would see that there are these cultivated,
Well,
smart
we're
gentlemen.
so we're so far beyond that point now, where it's like you couldn't Siskel and Ebert's too much. You'd have
Yeah.
to, and
No.
even now, like on their, it's funny because like on their YouTube channel or whatever, I don't know if Roger's wife or whatever got the rights back to some of it or whatever, but they're legally posting episodes now instead of bootlegs.
High
And
quality ones, right?
yeah, yeah, or as
Good.
high quality as they could be,
Right.
and they're dividing it up by movie, so you're not even getting the whole episode. It's like here's the 5 minutes they talked about Sides of the Lambs or something, or the
Mhm.
7 minutes they talked about Cape Fear,
Yeah, yeah.
and those are getting hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of views. It's really funny, but it's like that's almost too much. That 5 minute conversation where they show clips of the movie, talk about Martin Scorsese, give a complete overview of the plot, give their mini reviews, thumbs up, thumbs up. That's almost too much now for people, So
And it's sad. Like instead of having these full-on deep conversations where you come out better of them, it's like, well, I've got to get this over with so I can get back to my house and then watch YouTube in my room for like the rest of the day. It's like
right, yeah,
you're
it's weird,
leaving.
man.
You have no time to have no. I don't know. It's completely backwards, and it's just becoming. You talked about it with Megan, and we talked about it in our recent episode on arachnophobia. It's just and other recent conversations, other podcasts, people are just losing the bandwidth, I guess you could say, for these long
Yes.
lasting, deep conversations. And
And
that's,
well,
yeah,
we are losing the bandwidth to process and absorb
yeah, yeah,
and to really take the time to sit with something and think about it. And I was funny because watching both of these movies, I kind of felt that. And, you know, I had to, of course, reviewed them, I don't know, and probably the last time I've seen either one of them was probably 6 years ago when last time I talked about them.
mm,
And then watching both of these movies, I'm like, I don't know if these movies would work today, either one of them. And I know Cape Fear was kind of seen as a kind of a uneven, if not a bit of a miss from Scorsese at the time, but because it was a remake and because, you know, we can elaborate on that, but it's neither one of these movies is in a particular hurry to get to its point.
yeah, exactly.
And it really kind of wants you to not just sit in the plot and the machinations of the plot, but I would say almost more Silence of the Lambs, especially with the way that it ends. It definitely feels like your takeaway is supposed to be that you're going to be thinking about this movie for the next 3-4 weeks, right?
Mm,
And we just don't live in that kind of economy of thought anymore. There's just not that bandwidth. There's not that much time that's given to it. And, you know, and I think people like you and I are as guilty of it as anybody because it's get to the theater and get your reaction out there and get your soundbite and get your tweet out and get your blue sky skeet. What are they calling them?
yeah,
Get your, you know, bust your nut and move on. And that's really what, you know, get your podcast recorded, talk about it, you know, and it's like you just find yourself dealing more superficially, more quickly to an audience that is increasingly more superficial. And no one is going to be talking about any movie that comes out today in a week. And that's why something like I guess a Barbie or Oppenheimer, or this year would be Sinners,
yep,
when something like that does come out, it's so rare now because time just moves so fast. But whereas, you know, it feels like Silence of the Lambs. Feels like we talked about that for the decade
mm,
after it came out. It felt like that movie just never really went away because you could kind of then a couple years down the line see its influence on something like the early X-Files, or you could
yeah,
see, you know, it just sort of reshaped culture a little bit in the way that like every bad guy was in the Hans Gruber mold after Hans Gruber, and then every bad guy became Hannibal Lecter after a while, right?
yeah,
Like
yeah,
it's that stuff like that just doesn't happen anymore. Where the ramifications of a movie when it is they there is no zeitgeist, it doesn't feel like, and then when a movie happens to find the zeitgeist, we're not thinking and talking about it to as long, you
yeah.
know. We're not sitting with these things anymore. We watch it, it's over, we mark it on Letterboxd, it's on to the next, on to the next, on to the next.
Yeah.
So
Silence of the Lambs is, and just that's kind of a neat segue to actually talk about these movies. But like Silence of the Lambs is a movie that I still think about today, and I will talk about why. I think there's a couple. My most recent rewatch just kind of reiterated a lot of stuff to me.
mm,
But you talking about like not being able to retain that stuff, I thought a good way to start the conversation, and we usually do this, and I want to talk about Cape Fear, and then I want to talk about Silence of the Lambs, then we can kind
sure.
of compare and contrast or
Yeah.
meld. But Cape Fear, what was your first memory watching Cape? Did you watch it in a theater? What did you think of it? And then and then we'll talk about the difference in quality or comprehension
Sure.
then versus now. But what
Yeah.
was your first experience with Cape Fear?
This Cape Fear for me was a home video watch. I remember, ironically, my memory of both of these movies is about the same. I don't know if they came out at home video roughly around the same time. It seems like that would kind of make sense. But I remember Cape Fear. Uh, it's really crazy, but I remember like cooking out. I remember my dad grilling, and I remember so that it would have been summertime, and I remember him renting the tape, and especially on a Saturday or a Sunday, that was kind of what we did. Is that, you know, in the evening, my dad would go cook some steaks on a charcoal grill or whatever, hamburgers, and then we'd watch a couple of movies in the evening, you know, as it was cooling down. I remember it was super hot summer day. We didn't have air conditioning. I remember sitting there, and I was probably no more than 8 or 9. So it really wasn't a movie I should have been watching. But my dad didn't care. Other than if something was, there was an abundance of nudity. It wasn't even so much the nudity as it was like if there was sex, he'd send me out of the room. You know, my mom would go, oh, and then he'd send me out of the room, and then he'd tell me when I could come back in. And sometimes he'd fast forward and go, okay, whatever. But for the most part, he'd just send me out of the room and then come back in. And that's what I remember for Cape Fear. It's like I remember seeing it for the very first time. I can remember roughly how big I was. It's like it's a real vivid sense memory for me. And I remember the big takeaway that I had, that I think everybody had for the movie, was De Niro. It was his performance. It was such an iconic performance that it's become a long-term bit on The Simpsons, right? Of Sideshow Bob, right? Kelsey Grammer has been doing a version of De Niro's character for almost 40 years now, or 35 years. So, yeah, I think that's its legacy, I think.
Yeah, instead of talking about the movie itself, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
the score and Elmer Bernstein, I believe, from Ghostbusters fame.
adapted. Yeah, he did. And like you said, though, instead of talking about the movie and why it's lasting, it's because of the Simpsons keeping it in that pop culture. People they'll know that as Sideshow Bob's theme. They won't know it as the Cape Fear theme.
That's very true. Yeah, but I mean, the transformation of De Niro, it was sort of kind of a return to a sort of a Travis Bickle, like
Right.
he'd been dark, obviously, but he played a lot of sort of charming scumbags. He'd even done some comedies like Midnight Run and other stuff, and so this was sort of like him returning back to 70s De Niro, right? He's going to really transform himself physically. There's not going to be he's going to be as menacing and psychotic as possible.
Yeah.
And so the ideas of him, almost to a point of comedy, if like there's a odd, and like Scorsese has that in his movies, right? There's always sort of this odd comedic edge to his films. There's this dark humor. And sometimes he really plays that up, like with Wolf of Wall Street, even Goodfellas to some extent. He kind of plays it up. And sometimes it does feel like maybe he loses control a little bit, just a little. And I think like the reveal of him at some point talking to the daughter and then being upside down while he's doing it is unintentionally funny, I think.
Yeah.
It's menacing until the camera pans over and he's upside down and it's like a shot out of Airplane or Hot Shots.
Yeah.
And you're like, this is like a Lloyd Bridges shot out of Hot Shots, and you're like, this is funny. Like it's not what he's saying isn't funny, but it's like comedically. It's just there's certain moments that are like I mean him. Oddly, them watching Problem Child, which is one of the most despicable movies I think ever made.
Yeah.
That movie makes me sick to my stomach just looking at it, and has since I was a kid. I fucking hate that movie. And so then I always forget that that's the movie they're watching in the theater. And it almost adds another layer of disturbingness because he's laughing at this
that hard. Yeah.
Terrible movie. Terrible movie. So I and he's just sitting there smoking and laughing and did this. And I don't know, like Jessica Lange, like what world is she coming from in this movie? Nick Nolte is kind of abysmal in this. And he's kind of a hit or miss guy, like, and yet somehow it's disturbing, it's menacing, it's campy, it's funny, and it goes on too long. Yeah. And that's how I remember it back then. Mm-hmm. I remember it being more menacing and more scary because of De Niro. As I've revisited, as I've gotten older, it seems campier and campier.
Yeah.
And it very much feels like Scorsese doing De Palma, who was obviously doing Hitchcock.
Right. It's Scorsese aping the aesthetics of other horror directors instead of doing his thing, even though it still has his like debased characters and all that.
And intensity.
Yeah.
And I didn't really notice that, how intense, like the rapidity of it. One, because it is, I think, 30 minutes too long, probably, or 20 minutes too long. But any other time except for I watched Silence of the Lambs first and then I watched Cape Fear.
Hmm.
And I was like, these movies are set at two different speeds.
Yeah.
Like Cape Fear is like zip, 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 like it's just moving through. And because it wants you to feel like this family does, that you are being overwhelmed and overtaken. That Max Cady has introduced himself and injected himself into your life, and he is overtaking you. It's very rape coded, It's very not just because of what he does and how he menaces the women, but just you definitely feel like this encroaching, looming presence he's not creeping up on you like Michael Myers. He is just he just appears and he is all consuming.
Right.
By the time you recognize he's there, he's already in the house, kind of a thing. And he's going right for your daughter's bedroom, and he's going right for her underwear, and you're not going to stop him. And that's what the movie is essentially about. And if you try to stop him, then he'll rape your wife, and then he might rape you too. It's just like, and he's giving you that feeling of like you are being violated by this guy every time he's on the screen. And so and every time we flash back to Nick Nolte, he's screwing up again somehow. Because he's such a immoral, duplicitous character himself, such a weasel, that there's no place in this movie. There's not a single character in this movie who you feel safe or comfortable with.
Yeah.
Because the daughter is Danny, is so intentionally sexualized that you feel uncomfortable being in the same room with her.
Yeah.
Because she's both in sort of infantilized and sexualized at the same time. And so even without Katie calling her Max Cady or her phone ringing, like you feel skeevy. When you're left alone with her, you feel like, oh, I shouldn't, like you accidentally walked in the girl's locker room. I shouldn't be in here. I shouldn't be in this girl's bedroom watching her in her cotton underwear, paint her toenails or whatever, right? Like there's a odd sexuality and innocence to her that as a respectable person, you go, I shouldn't be seeing this. And then Scorsese just like makes you look at it.
Mm-hmm.
And then here comes Katie. And Jessica Lange is a woman who is hanging to the bare minimum of sanity because of the hell that her life is. And she obviously hates her life. She hates her daughter, right? She's sexually jealous of her own daughter. There's an odd sort of sexual rivalry between father, mother, and daughter. And then obviously there's the trauma of Nick Nolte constantly stepping out in their marriage, which we see him do. And so then when you're with her, you're like, I don't want to just be left alone with this lady. This lady's going to come unglued. This lady's going to go Toni Collette in Hereditary. I got to get out of this. I got to get away from this lady. You're not comfortable around her. And you're certainly not comfortable around Nick Nolte. He's sweaty. The camera's intentionally on him in a way that strips him of any handsomeness or charisma. He's also in that tipping point in his life where he's no longer able to be that charming asshole. He's just starting to kind of appear like a drunk on film. He's not completely fallen apart yet, but you're still like the stress lines are showing, the fractures are showing, and we're in his face at these angles that we just don't want to be near him. And we see the way that he pushes his body into I always forget her name, the character actress who ends up getting assaulted in this movie,
Ileana Douglas.
Yeah, right. They're obviously very flirtatiously, quasi-sexually playing racquetball, and then he throws her down, right, to beat her, and so it's like that. I don't want to be in this room with you, and you're obviously cheating on your wife, and so there's no safe place to go for us as the audience watching this, and there's no safe place for this family.
Right.
Every once in a while, we get relief when like he talks to one of the random people on the outside, but they usually turn out to be scumbags too.
Yeah.
Right. So.
Right. Yeah, it's an interesting counterpoint because Forrest Gump comes out 3 years after this, and Tom Hanks, they have kind of the same accent, except Tom Hanks kind of dumbs it down, makes it.
Oh,
friendly,
you're talking about De Niro.
De Niro, right, and then Katie. His accent, his southern drawl is so thick that it does, like you said, almost come off as a parody. So it is funny, but it's threatening at the same. What's fascinating about this movie is, it's really, really in your face, but the stuff that really fascinates me is the stuff that isn't spoken, like the stuff between that you just mentioned of the family. It's there, but unless you're not looking for it, once it's pointed out, you're like, oh my gosh, like that is completely true. When Nolte goes into Julius's room and closes the door, I'm like, don't close the door. Like, I know this is your daughter,
See
but
what I'm saying?
this is making me uncomfortable. And that's how it plays because she's had more of a connection with Katie than she has with her own father. She's more threatened sexually by her own father than she is this guy who's a
Yes.
convicted rapist. And
Correct. Correct.
all this subtext is again that's the interesting stuff, but you have, I guess, I'm not sure if the in your face stuff is for the audience so they can have something to latch onto and kind of focus on that instead of all the other stuff. But again, my experience with this movie, I did, like I said, I rode my bike to the theater. I watched it. I thought it was an intense time at the movies. I think it might have been it had to be my first Scorsese movie in a theater.
Mm.
It might have been one of the, because I didn't start really diving into 90s movies or 70s movies or 80s movies until after this. So Taxi Driver and Goodfellas and New York, New York, all these other Scorsese movies are not even in my radar at this point. And I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
that's what put it in my radar. Like you said, De Niro is like, this is the first time I was aware of his power as an actor. And
Yeah.
it's weird to think that I think this is his last Oscar nomination for Best Actor. Like his only nomination have been supporting actors recently,
Yeah.
which is
Yeah.
strange. As like you said, this is more of a '70s De Niro, so he's recapturing some of that. But I don't know if he's had, other than Killers of the Flower Moon, which he's incredible in. Like I don't know if he's
Grudge match.
good. Yeah, obviously you have to.
Yeah.
I mean, you
Right.
got is it Stallone? That's Stallone. You got
Yeah.
to raise your game when you're acting
That's
against.
right.
But again, all this stuff, he's a joke, but he's a threat, and
Yeah.
he's
That's right.
there, but he's laughing at problem child. I think it's an incredible performance, but it also has to do with the way he's presented, and that's every bit Scorsese that's presented.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
this is another Travis Bickle, this is another Jake LaMotta, this is another monster that's kind of fitting in that kind of era. But again, you're looking at it's that subtext of everything that fascinates me more than the in your face stuff. And the other thing I noticed this time is that there's a lot of scenes where it's just back and forth, like over
Oh
the
yeah.
shoulder shot. And it goes on for like 5 minutes and they're good conversations. But I'm like, this is so dull to look at
Yes.
because I get that there's a threat and you feel threatened by these people or what's not being said, but still if you're just looking at it, it's like, wow, there's no imagination to this until the angle switches and it's De Niro coming closer to Lewis and it's like, oh my
Yeah.
God,
That's
and then
right.
the threat
Yeah.
becomes explicit, right?
Yeah. Well, I think he's trying to box you in.
Yeah.
So you're stuck in this loop of, like you said, tight over the shoulder shot, reverse shot, right? Just standard, but it's you feel, because we never really break out and get those like wide shots, during those intense exchanges of a lot of dialogue. Because the other thing about De Niro's character is he monologues a lot. He goes on and philosophizes and what he really believes slips into something that's very, very obviously I mean, he's kind of the devil, right?
Yeah.
He's sort of this quasi-religious, animalistic, pseudo-literate, backwoods preacher psychopath.
Mhm.
But he's kind of the devil. He's sort of this seducer. He's sort of this, you know, Jessica Lange at some point talks about, like, basically you're uglier than I thought you would be. And he's like, well, prison has made me coarse. It's like he's got that sort of Southern genteel politeness to him,
Mhm.
even as he's being deeply menacing. What bothers you? Is it my tattoos? He's like, it's very, honestly, the performance, and obviously I know that this is a remake, but and there's a little bit even beyond of this. There's a little bit of Night of the Hunter in him,
Oh yeah. Yeah.
right?
Right.
And obviously Mitchum shows up, but there's a lot of that guy in there, the Reverend whatever, and then there's and this is funny because this is sort of the same character. There's a little bit of Reverend Kane from Poltergeist 2 in here too.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah.
It's like, glad to meet you.
Mm.
I'm just here to help. Like there's that sort of religiosity, that polite religiosity when it's just absolute terror behind it, right? Like
Yeah.
it's sort of the face of the wolf. It's a wolf in sheep's clothing. It's a false prophet. It's a whatever you want to say.
Yeah.
And all
He's
of the he's more of a wolf in wolf's clothing, but kind
right.
of trying to appear a little bit. He manages to at times appear alluringly dangerous. He's never not dangerous.
Right.
But there's it's not one for one, but there is some of that too in Hannibal Lecter, right?
Right.
There's something alluring about the way that his mind works and the way that he sees the world that draws you in, but he's still a predator. It's his instinct. He can't help it.
Right. He's the devil who thinks he's speaking for God, right? He's on a righteous quest, but
Do you think he thinks he's speaking for God? Do you think Max Cay's a true believer?
I don't think he's I don't think he's a true believer. I think that he puts on the front that he's a true believer. He's speaking for this stuff, but
Hmm.
he keeps talking about I'm going to teach you patience. I'm going to bring the righteous thunder down. He thinks
Hmm.
he's giving the Bodens what they deserve, but he's and he keeps I like how he keeps saying like, "Oh, you're threatening me," but then he'll threaten the person that's threatening
Yeah,
him. Like
that's
he'll
right.
keep doing
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
And I swear, like some of the dialogue you're saying, I swear Forrest Gump has that same dialogue. It's just the exact same dialogue. I just think that they're twinging it a bit so that it's not threatening.
Mm,
It's more comforting in a way that's even more kind of, come on, are you kidding me? That kind of thing.
yeah.
But and again, it's weird because you say your dad like did barbecues for you. I did see this in the theater, but then of all things, I remember sitting my parents down when this came out on VHS and showing this movie to my parents. So you have rape scenes, you have attempted rape scenes. It got to
Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah,
point
yeah,
at the
yeah.
end when Katie's burnt and when Sam's finally beating him to a pulp. My mom was literally yelling, "Get him!" It's like, whoa, because she never reacts to stuff. And
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think it's
yeah.
because he just got under your skin for so long that's what
Yeah,
happened.
yeah,
And
yeah.
I love that you mentioned, and I caught it. This I did start laughing is when he's talking on the phone. First of all, I think when the Laurie character is talking to him, and when Danny is talking, this is the first time that they've met him. If
Yeah.
you don't know what we know, he comes off as very charming, and that's holy shit. That's for De Niro to do that is
Yes.
incredible, right? It's incredible. But when you talk about Danny's talking on the phone that hands when he's upside down, yeah, you have these moments that turn from sinister to hilarious. But then you have these parts when he turns around and he's wearing Garciela, is that her name?
Yeah, yeah.
The he's wearing Garciela's a
Yeah.
wig and her clothes. It's like
Yeah.
that is
It's
almost
campy.
it's laugh out loud ridiculous.
Yeah.
But then it's the whole thing where he strangles the Claude character, and
Joe
then
Don Baker.
Jordan Baker. And then
Yeah,
when the
yeah.
family comes down and discovers it, and when Danny sees Garciela's body, she just keeps saying, "Oh my God," over and over again. And it's haunting in a
Yeah.
way that she's reacting to death and murder, like in a way that hits me like no other movie has ever hit me. So this movie is
But then
incredible.
Nick Nolte's slopping around like super
Right.
sloppy,
So
double
it's
dare, and Joe
everything.
Don Baker's blood. Yeah, and
Yeah.
that gets to the point of almost being comical, like Leonardo DiCaprio on Quaaludes in Wolf of Wall Street. Like it's like I
Right.
yeah, yeah,
And then you find out that Katie's under the Cherokee. Like it's like what this has gone too far. It's just like a comedy
yeah,
now. It's kind
yes.
of lost its threat. But again, my wife was in the room. She'd seen this before, and so she was
Hmm.
just doing her own thing. But the only time she would look up is when there was screaming, and she would look up and go, and she would look back down. The Lori scene is so. I think in your episode you told Paul you had to turn away. It's so much, and
Yeah,
I hate saying this, but gracefully it cuts away. So we just see him biting her cheek off, and then he starts just beating her to a pulp, and it cuts outside in a way that's a relief because we've seen the terrible stuff is still to come. He still hasn't finished with
I
her.
know. Yeah.
And then later, when they're on that boat and there's the threat of get down on your knees, take off your clothes, like, and you get the
Hmm.
feeling he's going to do this. There's more threat. And again, I feel bad saying this. Maybe it's the pervert in me, but it's like you feel more of a threat with them being threatened by rape because you know where it can go.
Yes,
And
yes,
even though I don't want Lee to end up with Sam at the end. I want Danny to get as far away from these people
yeah,
as possible. It's
yeah,
still the idea of the family, right? That
yes,
you want them to succeed, especially this guy. Scorsese does this thing where, and it's like I said, it's really repetitive. They get him off the boat because they burn his face up, but then he gets back on. It's like they repeat the same scene again,
Yes.
except now his face is all burnt, and he keeps turning around, and there's like whip sounds, like it's a
Yeah.
cartoon all of a sudden.
Yes.
And
Yes.
then he gets chained to the pole, and he's speaking in tongues. I think because he thinks he's ascending to heaven. I think I don't know, like that's what you do, and
He's in a righteous ecstasy. Yeah.
right. So
Yeah.
I think this movie goes way too far in a lot of places, but not far
I tell
enough.
you,
I don't know if that makes
my
sense.
issue with the movie is that I think it is extremely successful at establishing its characters, making Sam extraordinarily unlikely or unlikable, and therefore, even by the time that you are menaced by Katie and you hate Sam, so by the time they meet for the first time, you don't really know who to root for
Yes.
because you haven't actually seen Katie do anything. The score is telling you he's the devil, right? Like, the tattoos, the introduction, the rap sheet tells you that this guy's no good. And you know that he's unhinged, but what you're kind of really seeing from him is some superficial charm.
Yeah.
And you've got none of that with Sam. When you are around Sam, your skin crawls. He is a seersucker suit wearing asshole lawyer who doesn't really give a shit about the law and is unfaithful to his wife and isn't a very good dad. And it's just a kind of a sweaty, lying sack of shit. He's a weasel. That's what you feel like when he's around. So the movie kind of gets you to go, I don't know, maybe this Katie's got a point.
Yeah.
So that when you finally see him truly, I mean, they have him kill the family dog, but it's off screen. They have him do all these escalating terrible things. But when he finally gets her, one of the few kind of innocent characters in the movie to some extent, and she's drunk, and he's being sort of charming, and he's kind of telling her the truth. And it's the moment when he's like, well, I was protesting a bomb or a nuclear power plant. And he does that whole spiel. You're like, oh no. At the moment he does that, like, oh, he's going to kill this woman. Like he's going to, like, he's not just trying to get information out of her. He's going to murder this woman is what you feel. He's going to brutalize her and murder her. And then we cut to them in the hotel or her house or apartment, and she's in her underwear and he's taking her clothes, and you're just like, no. But as horrific as that scene is, I don't think that the movie ever is able to escalate it any further from there.
Yeah.
Which is sort of its problem, which is, okay, yeah, the threat is that he's going to assault Jessica Lange and Danny. And that is essentially the ultimate threat of this movie is that he's going to rape this guy's teenage daughter in front of him. I mean, that's it, right? That the virginal teenage daughter is going to be sexually exploited. Mm-hmm. And that is Nick Nolte's character's paranoia, too. He's got this sort of weird complex about her fucking her English teacher, her summer school theater teacher. He's just got weird. And then on the one hand, he's talking about that. And then the next scene, he's turned on and wants to have sex with Jessica Lange. I don't know if you caught that.
Yeah.
Where he's like, oh, well, blah, blah, blah. And then all of a sudden he finds himself aroused because she's just like stretching her. She's like, well, she's still young or whatever, and blah, blah, blah. And he's like, well, I'm more worried about the whatever. And then he's like, hey, now, like she's doing something to turn him on. Mm-hmm. She hasn't done anything. He's turned on by the idea of his daughter having sex with somebody.
Yeah.
And so then when you look at like he's humping away and Jessica Lange is just sort of laying there, sort of receiving his lust for his own daughter. That's what this movie's about. It's really about two guys who want to fuck Juliette Lewis. Right? And they're both the same. I mean, they're both monsters. He's a monster within the bounds of Sam is the monster within the legal system. And Katie is the opposite, but they're both monsters. They're both scum. And so is what's his face? Oh my gosh. Gregory Peck when he shows up.
Yeah.
Which is like, To Kill a Mockingbird. But let's flip it around. He's a piece of shit.
Right.
Televangelist style lawyer, right? So, and the thing is, like, what's funny is like every time we get to Joe Don Baker or Mitchum or Gregory Peck or some of these old timey actors, I'm almost like, I want more of them in the movie. I was like, can't they're almost our only respite.
Yeah.
From because everybody else is a shit heel on this movie.
Yes, they are. So that's the thing. It's like Katie is a rapist, right? He's a
Yeah.
brutal.
Yes.
It's the scene where the three guys take him on and he fights back. The thing that's incredible, and I don't know if it's a good thing or a great thing, but the way that he fights back, and in a way you're cheering for him fighting back.
Yeah, that's right.
And it's like, I shouldn't be feeling this way. Like, the Bowden character has not done anything as terrible as this Katie character has done. But
No.
why are we rooting against and it's
But that's
because,
Scorsese. He wants you to sympathize with the monster.
yes,
He always
just
does.
his
Yeah.
modus operandi.
Yeah.
That completely fits, right?
Yeah. And then no matter and there's always a breaking point, but he will take you to well past the point of which you should be like, these people are deplorable or that guy's deplorable.
Mhm.
He takes you well past that point and you're still kind of cheering. You still kind of want to be a gangster. You want to be a part of that crew long after you've seen them. The movie opens with, in Goodfellas, with them murdering a guy in a trunk. And you're like, you forget about it. Within 5 minutes of Henry Hill being like, telling his life story, you're like, wow, what a life. You're like, but he has to hook you to get you to explore those possibilities. And I think if there is a failure in this movie, and I don't know that's a failure because I think maybe it's just what he was trying to do, is that we were almost too much on the Max Cady side.
Yeah.
So that when the movie needs to reverse its course and we need to really give a shit about that family on that boat, I don't.
Yeah. Well, what they're doing is they completely take away all the faults and foibles once they get on that boat. Once they get, we're just
Yes.
supposed to forget about all that,
Yes.
right? And in the original movie, which again, ironically, it's in black and white because that's the movie, it's black and white. There's no shades of gray in the 62 version.
That's
Here
right.
It's Scorsese-fied, right? And you're absolutely
Yep.
right. So I want to say one more thing and agree with you on one more thing, and then I want to seek into the other movie in a way
Sure.
that it's talking about Scorsese. But you're absolutely right when you say when he attacks Laurie, that's the high point that there's never any higher than that, right?
Yeah.
Because when he kills Graciela, when he kills the Cursette character, he's Freddy Krueger by then. When he turns
That's right.
around
That's right.
in the wig, it's like, oh, he's just a regular serial killer. So
He's Anthony Perkins in Psycho 3.
That's it. It's ridiculous. And so it's
Yeah.
not as much of, it's terrible, but it's not as much of a threat. And so, yeah, that's an
that's right.
incredible point. So my final thing that I want to say about Cape Fear is, yeah, and we've mentioned it a little bit, is people call this an impersonal Scorsese movie, but I don't know if I agree with that. I think there's
I
a
don't agree with
lot.
that.
There's so much that's like we talked about, his grayifying of all the characters,
That's
the
right.
way like them pushing past the limits, making you cheer for these horrible, terrible people because they're so.
He takes a classic black and white film and makes it an incest story.
Right. And I think Wesley Strick says that they rewrote the script, I think 12 times to kind of suit what Scorsese wanted to do. Again, famously, it was going to be Steven Spielberg that was going to direct this. And he realized it's too much for me. Hey, Marty, my friend.
That would not have worked. That would not have worked.
That would not. He gave it to him, which in a way, because I think Scorsese was in director's jail at this point because of Last Temptation of Christ. There was
That's
so
right.
much that was burying
Right.
him. And this is Scorsese's first $100 million grossing
Yep.
movie. Spielberg, in a way, gifted that to him.
Yep. Yep.
And again, he traded it for Schindler's List. So Spielberg had a good year in a couple of years too with all that.
Yep.
But like I said, it's got all that stuff. It's got the Scorsese thing. It's got that the shot that finally brought me back. Yeah, it's ridiculous. They fight on the boat, but when Nolte is crouching like an ape on that riverbank, he's animalistic, full on.
Yep.
He looks down and he's got literal blood on his hands.
Yep.
That's the sin. That's Scorsese's thing, the Catholicism. It's all there. And he washes it off and then sees something where it makes him jump. And when he looks at his hands again, they're clean, but are they really?
That's right. That's right.
And I think that's the over the top, like I said, the over the top stuff doesn't work as well for me as that subtext.
It's his, this movie, as far as the Nolte character goes, is you sow the wind, you reap the whirlwind.
Yeah.
And he makes this sort of immoral decision that is actually kind of relevant today to some extent, but it's sort of, he makes a decision that is unlawful, that is a dereliction of his duty and oath as an officer of the court and as attorney. Because in his mind, this Katie is a monster. So if I can hide some exculpatory evidence, or something that would raise a reasonable doubt about the victim, there's a chance this guy gets off.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not going to do my best job to defend him. I'm going to intentionally his trial, and I don't care. That's the sin. And so what his daughter, his wife, himself, everybody what everybody experiences in this movie is because of they're reaping what he has sown.
Right. It's rot because of that. Yeah.
Correct. And so that's why no matter what he does, we'll never be able to wash the blood off his hands, because there's no taking back the trauma of that houseboat. There's no taking back that your, whatever she's supposed to be, 14, 15, 16-year-old daughter was, she's already sexually molested by the time that they're out of that theater, because she's sucking on his fingers.
Mm-hmm.
I know that the movie kind of presents it as like she's curious, whatever. She's a child. He's a grown man.
Right.
Right. So she's already been sexually abused by the time we even get to the boat.
Right. It's shades of evil.
Correct.
And that's this movie's whole.
And in effect, it's his fault. He opened the door to that evil to come into his life because he didn't do the right thing.
Right. It's all these. He's not, like I said, he's not as evil as the Katie character, but in his own way, he's done things that he's paying for. This is his penance. Like,
I think I think the point of the juxtaposition of him, the Ileana Douglas, of when they're playing, and he literally knocks her to the floor,
mm-hmm.
and she falls to the ground laughing. We also see her later get whacked and fall to bed laughing and then crying. Yeah. Right. So it's like, those two scenes were given to us to say, like, these two characters are not as different as you think they are.
Right.
Neither one of them has any respect for women. Both of these men see the women around them as nothing but sexual objects or vessels for their wrath, including their own daughter.
Yeah.
So these guys and by the end, he's like you said, he's like a primate, sort of like Katie is. These men are animals, men are perverted, and like animals, their own daughter if given the chance. Exactly. That's the thesis of the movie.
Yeah. So yeah, even reading, I think, Owen Gleiberman's review just today, he called it a crowd-pleasing thriller, and I was like, "What are you talking about? How in what world is this?"
I think it's trying to be,
but it's so,
and that's why I think it's untrue to itself.
It's ugly.
And I think I think that my final thought on this movie is, because ultimately I think it's masterfully done. I would maybe even argue it's better directed than Silence of the Lambs. But it's the thing about 70s Scorsese is he didn't give a shit whether he pleased you or not.
Yeah.
You get that sense of like, he's making it his way, mm-hmm. but he's still trying to make it a crowd-pleasing thriller.
Right.
And those two things don't go together, because he's adding in all of this profane subtext and themes. It does, and I'm wrong, because it worked, because it's one of the top grossing movies of the year.
Yeah.
And like you said, it's one of his highest grossing films of all time. And probably it still is, adjusted for inflation. So I'm wrong. He was right. But I don't think the movie as a story completely works, because I think it's trying to be two different things. It's trying to be almost a throwback to his 70s Take No Prisoners cutthroat exploration of perversion, and also being like a good time at the movies for the family, like a revenge thriller or something. And it isn't. This isn't Breakdown.
Right.
It's almost trying to be. It just doesn't. You would have to give us a protagonist. Who is the protagonist in this movie?
Right, exactly. There's no, you give us nobody to root for. There's no kind of out. This movie doesn't.
So how does it please the crowd?
Right, and in some way it did. That's the crazy. I think people with Silence of the Lambs. I think people were kind of interested. So again, we kind of answered this, but I wanted to talk, just to see in the silence, talk about Scorsese a little bit. You're talking about a guy, and maybe we've answered this already, Born in 1942 in New York, he grew up in Little Italy. His grandparents were Italian immigrants. He had asthma as a kid, so that's what got him addicted to movies. He
Hmm.
attended the, NYU, got his Master of Arts degree there, made some short films, got the attention of Roger Corman, made because of Who's That Knocking on My Door, he got to make Boxcar Bertha, I believe is the
Hmm.
one. And then Mean Streets hit in 73, and then history was made. Then you have
Yep.
the
Yep.
Scorsese.
Yep.
But what leading, and then you have like Raging Bull, you have Taxi Driver, you have, I think Age of Innocence came 2 years after this, so I won't use that. You have King of Comedy. My question for you, and I'm going to go over the same thing with Demme, looking at his history, at Scorsese's history, was there anything really that told us he could direct a horror genre picture? And is this
Yeah.
even horror? Is it more of a thriller, psychological thriller?
I think it's a thriller that is coming in the wake of, no pun intended, the Slashers, which is the name of my other podcast. I think that one thing that doing that show has revealed to me is that the line between a slasher, a thriller, a horror, and a murder mystery is very, very thin.
Hmm.
Because some people wrote some murder mystery novels and sold them into Europe during the fascist regimes of Germany and Italy in particular. And those became the Krimis and the Giallos. And then as their culture sort of disintegrated and or after they were free of censorship, the appetite for violence increased, the appetite for sex increased. And so they took our standard detective stories or murder mysteries and amplified them with sex and violence.
Mhm.
Most of them was already there.
Right.
Those movies then, those books and stories and movies post-fascism became very popular with a group of directors like Scorsese, who were being influenced by things like the French New Wave and the Italian Giallos and some German expressionist films and German crime movies. And so they imported it back into the US. And it basically went into two different markets. It went into the exploitation market, which is let's take the tits and the violence and focus on that.
Hmm.
And then it went into the new Hollywood, which is let's take these morally gray characters and these downbeat endings and these explorations of the dark side of humanity and the sort of scuttling of the classic Hollywood tropes and form of having likable protagonists and all that. Like let's embrace some of that. And Scorsese's definitely from that branch, not the exploitation branch, even though he does work with Corman, although everybody did at some point.
Yeah.
Which ought to tell you that there's something there too, right? Is like everybody kind of has to traffic in exploitation of that era before they can maybe go on and make elevated movies. But like Taxi Driver is a horror movie. It's a giallo film,
Hmm.
as much as anything else is. Does he go around with like a stiletto knife and or razor blade and black gloves and a trench coat and slash people? No, it's Americanized. He goes around with a snub nosed gun. He goes around with, whatever, So I think that yeah, I think it makes sense that he makes a horror movie. I think there's horror to almost all of his movies. There's something very horror. He's not afraid of all of a sudden like Goodfellas has horror in it.
Yeah.
It's just that I think that we have these sort of hard and fast genre distinctions that I don't think are actually very real.
Hmm.
What's the difference between a murder mystery? I mean, let's be honest. What's the difference between a true crime documentary and a horror movie?
Yeah.
Other than one of them happened.
Hmm.
So it's like, well, I can't watch horror movies, but you can watch a documentary about a woman be raped and murdered and dismembered by her husband.
Hmm.
You can watch 10 of them back to back. You listen to a podcast where people laugh and drink wine about dismemberment and rape and sodomy and necrophilia, but you can't watch a doll that has somebody's serial killer spirit in it because of some voodoo. Like that's what's evil.
Yeah.
So these distinctions don't exist. And I think that the real people like Scorsese who watch a shit ton of movies, especially European cinema, Europe's way less precious about its genres than we are. Something like Japan or Asia. It's like really, that's like a Hollywood thing. That sort of, and honestly, I think it's just marketing.
Yeah.
This is a romance movie, right? It's just we need to be able to call it something so that we can sell it to you. That's capitalism. And in other places where they're less influenced by that, you can have a giallo film that has comedy beats in it and has sex in it and it has, and all this, it has kung fu and it has everything all at the same time, and somehow it kind of works, and you're like, oh wow, I didn't know movies could just do everything, because that's just so yeah. I do see where he would be perfect for something like this. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it's all about the way that we reconcile what we're watching, right? That's just how to make ourselves comfortable. So, Seeking to Demi, just a little bit of history.
Isn't King of Comedy kind of a horror movie, really?
It is like it's a PG horror movie that doesn't. Again, it's all implied. Like Rupert Pupkin, he's
and not to go down that path, but I think that's something that first Joker movie does recognize.
Yeah.
And maybe to its discredit, right? It was like, well, you're making the subtext text now. You're making it too obvious, so you're kind of missing the point of King of Comedy. But
right,
he's a scary character.
He is. He's one step. It never goes the R-rated territory, but it's there. It's seated.
It's there, right? And it's almost more horrifying. Yeah,
right. So again, that's what we did. Yeah, Scorsese. It's definitely there. So him doing a full-out horror or a thriller with horror elements that we can't get away from.
That's right.
That makes sense. So Demme, again, you're looking at him. He's renowned for making movies about humanistic kind of working class, blue America type heroes or characters, right? He was born in 1944. New York. He served as a film critic for his paper, I think at University of Florida in the 60s. He started making short films, got the attention again of Roger Corman, started working for him. So there's that tie in there. He made Caged Heat for him, right? And then eventually he became well known for Melvin and Howard, for Swing Shift, for Married to the Mob. Again, these working class kind of characters. So let's start our Silence of the Lambs conversation this way. Is there anything in his movie? Something Wild is in there too, and maybe that's the one. But is there anything in Demme's filmography that would tell you, yeah, this guy's suited for a horror movie? What do you think?
I'm literally looking at all of his movies right now. The hard part for me, because I really have thought about this question, is that he is so synonymous with this movie in my mind, I almost forget that he directed anything else.
Yeah.
So even though I've seen, I don't know, maybe 10% of his filmography as a director, I don't associate him with any of those other movies. Like you're like, well, he directed Philadelphia. Did he? I don't know. You know what I mean? It's like that's a big movie.
Yes.
But I'm like, I don't know that he did that. And I know that he did, but it doesn't register in the same way. To me, there is one Jonathan Demme movie at Silence of the Lambs. That probably has a lot to do with my age. This is probably the first time I ever heard his name was in conjunction with this movie. And for the longest time, although I guess I would have seen Philadelphia too, but yeah, I don't know. I can't answer that question because it seems so obvious to me because he did this. So right. Yeah. I know that's sort of a shitty answer, but it's all I got.
No, I mean that's true. Here's the thing that I can reconcile here, right? Yeah, he does Melvin and Howard, great Mary Steenburgen performance. I think it won her an Oscar, right? Something Wild, we side with Melanie Griffiths, like you've got. I think Mary, and it's Ray Liotta who's the horror show in it. Married to the Mob, Michelle Pfeiffer. She's you want her to get out of that life, that kind of thing. Yeah. Silence of the Lambs has Clarice Starling, who's a working class character.
That's right.
She tries to hide her southern accent so she sounds more sophisticated.
And her sexuality.
But she's trying to escape that by being an FBI agent, right? She's trying to find penance in whatever she's done. She hasn't done anything like Sam Bowden or Max Cady's done, but there's something in her past with the Spring Lambs that she wasn't able to act that's making her. So it's that human quality of Demme's movies that's in his previous films that is in here. When I saw, again, it's weird. This came out Valentine's Day in 1991 or around that time, right?
Very twisted.
My parents took me to see this. We saw this in a theater. Saw this with my parents, right?
Wow.
And what I walked away from, here's my two memories. I walked away from it thinking why did I like this cannibal character so much? We see him literally eat somebody on screen and still we want him to get away at the end. It's like, what's happening in my brain, right? And then the other thing is when Oscars came around the next year and it had stuck in the Academy's mind. Again, I don't have any faith in the Academy, but it had stuck in their mind so much that nothing after February 14th made a difference to any people that voted. They wanted Silence of the Lambs.
We were talking about this at the top. I feel like this was in all of our collective brains, not just movie people, not just like young movie nerds or whoever. This was in the pop culture collective unconscious from this point forward for the next 10 years. It felt like for the decade. It was just like it just like rewrote the culture.
Yeah.
So it just seems so obvious. Like this was a water cooler movie. This transversed the horror genre or the crime genre or FBI movies or murder mystery or police procedural. This was just it just sort of felt like the biggest movie of the year. Even though it wasn't, there were movies that grossed way more money than this.
Right.
It felt like this is the movie of that year. Silence of the Lambs is the movie of this year of the 90s, period. It just is.
Right. And my
And
brain,
it was obvious from February. Like this is it.
exactly. Well, I'll come back to the thought I just started. Why do you think that is? I think movies that are great and stand the test of time, I can't call movies masterpieces right from the get-go because I don't know what influence they've had yet. I can't call a masterpiece, label something a masterpiece because I don't know the impact, the influence. When a movie has this impact, like you're talking about, where people are still talking about it today, that's a lasting movie for me. What is that? Is that your same idea, or is that what makes a quality movie for you, or is that?
I think it has to have staying power for us to be like, yeah, it's a masterpiece. I think you have to have the benefit of history. As far as what made this movie, the movie is a nightmare.
Mm.
It has the feeling of a nightmare from beginning to end, and it only gets worse the further we go.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also no other option to go anywhere else. The way out is through. And so without them telling you, the movie very subconsciously telegraphs to the audience very quickly, there's no turning back for Starling. The moment that she runs to that office. And first of all, the master stroke of this movie is we effectively know everything about this character that we need to know about her during a silent run
Mm-hmm.
between the obstacle course by herself, not even into his office, into the elevator. Where she's small.
Yes.
Like first of all, she's a loner. She's serious. She's no bullshit. She's tough. She obviously looks young, but this is not obviously the youngest we've seen Foster. And so it gets recontextualized to us the moment she's in that elevator and all the men are looming over her. Then you see her for how small she really is. She almost presents big at first, almost like a finished product. She's almost like we're watching somebody who's already a badass, right? Like this is already like, and Jodie Foster played tough characters since she was a kid. So you're like, yeah, this is Jodie Foster. She's obviously beautiful, but she's also this tough character. And there was always, especially at that time, a kind of undercurrent of masculinity there with her, but she's real cute. And so there's this odd dichotomy of her masculinity and her femininity and her sex appeal and her youthful look. But it's like, she's perfectly cast, which is why Julianne Moore, God bless her, cannot do this role. Nobody will ever be able to do this again.
No.
Because Jodie Foster at this time in her life is the exact right person. I don't know about the book version of Starling, but is the exact right person for this character in this movie. It could never have been anybody else because she has all of the ingredients necessary. All of the psychosexual subtext of the movie is Jodie Foster.
Mm.
And then she gets on that elevator, man, and all the guys are both looking at her body, her breast, because Jodie's always been a big breasted woman. They're looking at her body, but they're also looking down on her. She's
in their oppressive red shirts. Yeah.
Yes. And they're very obviously upperclassmen or whatever it is. And she's obviously nobody and nothing because she's a woman, because she's young, because she's sexual, because she's whatever.
Yeah.
And then she's just effectively used as red meat. And we know by the end of that conversation that that she's just, that her sexuality, it's not her competence. It's not that first part that we see about her on the obstacle course that is getting her in with Lecter or on this case. It's the way that men look at her. It's the way that men objectify her is why she's being sent. And so then what that does is that makes us, we want her to make the most of the opportunity. If you're going to be exploited, then you better get something out of it, right? And like Lecter basically says that to her, right? He basically says in so many words that at our very first meeting, you are willing to be exploited for advancement.
Mm-hmm. So
I'm going to give you that opportunity, but you're going to regret it. It's more or less what he says.
Right. Well,
especially after the incident with Miggs.
Oh yeah, multiple Miggs.
Yeah.
What an incredible opening visual sequence that like you said, tells you everything you need to know about her and gets you in her corner once she steps in the elevator.
Without a word of dialogue.
She is larger than life in the frame, but when she steps in that elevator, she's diminutive. She's the she's just like you said, everybody's
almost like
down.
A child.
Yeah. Exactly.
Which is how they see her. Yeah.
She's the minority, right, in that office. Okay.
And now hang on a second though. So what does it say again? And this is, I think, where there is overlap between the movies. That she presents both as child and sex object to these men.
Mm-hmm.
Right? What is it that's primally wired in men, at least according to these two movies, that men are sexually attracted to the innocence of women and young women? Right. That they want to infantilize women. They want that there's a sort of a predatory nature in male sexuality, that you want the woman to be childlike, but also sexual.
Right.
That's twisted.
It is. The difference between these two movies, I know you said that you maybe would prefer Scorsese's direction. When you're looking at direction, like, sure, if it's in your face and you notice the direction, that's incredible, right?
Yeah.
But I would also, this direction that's in here is a different kind of incredible direction. So when you're watching Juliette Lewis or Jessica Lange, in a way, you as a viewer are sexualizing because the camera is sexualizing, and that's the point. I'm not saying
and the lighting is, and the everything is. Yes,
but right. Jodie Foster has called Jonathan Demme her favorite female director, and I don't mean that as
one's a maximalist movie and one's a minimalist movie.
Exactly, and
one is about everything we're shoving into the frame
as much as can.
Silence is everything that's not being said, everything that you're not seeing, everything that's out of the frame.
Right.
Yeah.
So we're not sexualizing Starling because, again, she's in, just sweatpants and a sweatshirt. Like, it's kind of, it's not coded as being like feminine. She's dressed like everybody else. Right?
No, it's very gender neutral.
Yeah, right. So when
but the way she does appear in the elevator is that her bust does come into focus.
Sure.
She's dressed like them, except for the fact that she's got tits. And that's what they notice.
But the difference is we notice that they notice.
Yes.
We don't notice it, right? We're not looking at her that way.
No, our eyes are drawn to them, and then what are they looking at? And then we look at, they're all looking at her ass and her tits.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yes.
And so when I saw the movie for the first time, I didn't register any of the visual stuff. I just registered there was a horror movie, there was a cannibal in it, you got out, she got the killer, like, you go home, you're happy, right? Their popcorn still tastes good. It hasn't been affected or any of your taste buds. But watching it, the more that you watch this movie, and Ebert did the same thing. I think he only gave it a 3.5-star review, and then he reacted to the horror stuff. And then later he did one of his great movies pieces on it, which is a different kind of review. And the same thing happens with me. You notice the visual language of this movie now. You notice the close-ups, how everybody's breaking that fourth wall, right? Mm-hmm. And it's making you uncomfortable because it's like Hannibal's not just talking to Starling, he's talking to you. You're being judged by Crawford. And the other interesting thing too is, even though Foster has those same shots, there's a weird dichotomy because I don't think we're ever intimidated by Foster, even though she's looking the same, because maybe that's in our brains because she's a woman. We don't feel threatened by her, and I think we're
Well, Jodie also Foster also, it's like I said, she's got that undercurrent of youthfulness to her,
yeah.
and so there's almost like kid sister quality to her in this movie a little bit,
Yeah.
to where there's an innocence, and so you sort of, which works out because by the time she's actually in danger, she's in danger the whole time, right?
Right.
Every man that she runs into is a predator,
Hmm.
right? I mean, and she has to kind of with Chilton or whatever his name is,
Chilton might be the worst.
right? She's like,
out of
well,
all
then
of
I
them.
wouldn't have had the pleasure of your company, right? She has to kind of play the game
Yeah.
to get the access to do her job. And the way that Crawford uses her and does kind of look at her, and then when they go to that funeral, when they drag that body out of the river, the way that all those male state troopers look at her, as the way that he tosses her aside is like, well, she can't handle I think it's better that we just go in there, which is obviously not true. He obviously knows she's an extraordinarily competent person,
Hmm.
but she is also at the same time in over her head. And that's where the genius of this movie comes in, is she is an extraordinarily competent person, but she is also over her head
Yeah.
because this is an extraordinary situation.
Right. So the two movies have similarities. Obviously, there's a
Yeah.
part where both the protagonist or the main bites off somebody's face, bites a piece off somebody's face, right?
Well, okay. I have one more thought before we go off that, because
Sure.
you said something great. Is like, we're in Crawford's face, we're in Chilton's face, we're in her face. The only person whose face we're not really in is Lecter's. Lecter is shot almost way back. He's just standing there waiting for us. He's in the wide shot, and the movie never. What is so good about this movie is the movie never cheats and does horror tricks to get us afraid of Lecter.
Hmm.
It's just this guy and his performance.
Yeah.
So if Lecter is not scary, if Hopkins does not deliver, the movie doesn't work, because the movie is not. It's not even really trying to do what Manhunter tries to do when it introduces us to Lecter,
Hmm.
where it kind of puts you in the cell with him. We're never really in the cell with him. We're always outside. We're always on the other side of the bars where we're supposed to be safe, but you don't feel safe.
Hmm.
We're also distance away from him, like he's a caged animal, like at the zoo, and we're just watching him. And even when we see him at the payphone at the end, when he's out and about, he's in our world, we're not very close to him. And then the camera literally pans away from him as he goes off into the world. Like, we're always at a distance from him, and yet it always feels like we're within arm's reach, and that we're within mouth reach. That he's could bite us and eat us at any time. And that's masterful filmmaking.
Right.
Because the instinct would be get close on him, zoom in on Lecter, put his face in your face. And it
Easy
doesn't
thing.
really happen.
Right.
It's everybody else's. It's all the mundane characters who are in our face.
Right. And that segues into what I wanted to talk about, is even though these movies have similarities, like Katie and Lecter are these horrible killers, right? And it's great that Hopkins is only in this for what, like 15 minutes, and he's still
Yeah.
like a pall hangs over the movie, where
Yeah.
De Niro is in practically every scene in Cape Fear, and it has the same impact. I think that's incredible. They're both incredible performances.
Yeah.
But if you're talking, like you're saying, visual language, I think where this movie has a leg up, a huge leg up in Cape Fear, is the visual language is constant throughout the entire movie. Like
That's
I said,
true.
it never cheats. Cape Fear is different from shot to shot or scene to scene.
It's
There's
vertigo in this scene. It's it's a lot of
12 Angry
Hitchcock.
Men, and it's just
Yeah.
you're just different. But this, the close-ups, the way that everything's so quiet, like where Cape Fear, everybody's screaming all the time. The
All the
horrors in
time.
here is like, it's because it's so quiet that kind of makes it even more unnerving. The sound design at the very end, when it's Clarice in that room, and it's just the buzzing of the lights and electronics, the Catherine screaming, the dog barking its guts out, and Clarice yelling at her to keep quiet, all that stuff. The sound design is amazing because it's overwhelming us. But going back to that visual language, it's so consistent where you see the guys in the elevator, where you see Crawford looking at her, you see it cuts to the part where you're talking about with the body, where it's all the guys staring at her, like waiting, and she has her strongest moment is when she says, "Please go on now. We got to get you out of here." That's so
Yeah.
strong and so
Yeah.
smart. Even Crawford references it and registers it. And then at the end, when it's in Gum's basement and he's
Yeah.
got the lights off and he's objectifying her in the
Yeah.
dark with
Yeah.
his goggles to the point where
Yeah.
he's reaching out. The visual language of this movie is unnerving and it's consistent and it's so good. I think the Tak Fujimoto stuff, it's Freddie
Yes.
Francis in
Yeah.
Cape Fear. I want to mention that. But here, Fujimoto's even conversations when they're close up, the backgrounds are blurred. So
Yeah.
it feels very claustrophobic, like it's just us and this person. And
Yeah.
it's unnerving in a way that's, and like you said, you talked about with Paul, like the thing, it becomes schlock, obviously, when he rips off the guy's face and wears it to get out of the hospital. That's horror movie tropes all
Yes.
pulling through and
Yeah.
through. But the whole rest of the movie is so quiet. It even
That's
cuts
Joe
to,
Pepper, damn it!
right.
Talk to him.
It cuts to Clarice talking to her, Cassie Lemon's the character, saying like, "Oh, he's not going to come after me. He'll think it's rude." Like it calms down again,
Yep.
and it is intense, but it's all this quietness that unnerves us instead of the in your face stuff. And I think, yeah, that visual stuff when you're a kid, it doesn't register. When you're an adult and you watch this 3-4 times on, and maybe you don't know why this movie is sticking with you. Maybe you don't know why it's getting under your skin. But on that fifth viewing, you're like, oh, I see it. That is
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
smart.
Yeah.
That is so smart.
Yeah. It's Scorsese, I think, is playing to the obvious.
Mhm.
Not that there isn't subtext. We talked about that.
Right.
But it's very much more, there's a lot more to it that's loud and in your face. And this movie is way more subconsciously unnerving the entire time through.
Right.
Yeah, because I mean, like, here's the other thing. It's like, oh, Hannibal Lecter, one of the scariest characters ever. He's scary long before, like, just by them telling you about him.
Yes.
Like we
Yeah.
never see him do anything to Miggs. The idea is that he talks Miggs into choking to death on his own tongue
Yeah.
after biting it off. How? How do you convince a guy to swallow your own tongue?
Right.
But when that happens, we're convinced that that character can do that after one scene.
Right. The visuals are all very subtle. Most of the writing is very subtle, almost poetic, I would say. The most on the nose thing that the movie does is it compares Clarice to wanting to save the spring lambs to wanting to save
Yes.
Catherine because they vocalize that.
Yeah.
I think the other couple things that are fascinating is the Death's Head moth in a way is a stand-in for Buffalo Bill. It's a stand-in for Hannibal. It's just where they're cocooned basically, and you can see that, and they want to break free, right? And then you have obviously the
and
like
Starling wants to become. She wants to be.
she wants to
free
become
too.
and get out, right?
Yeah.
When he peels off his face, Clarice, Hannibal, and Bill are also, this is the thing that's great, they're also ostracized by the society, right? That they want to be a part of. They
Yep.
want to exist among among humans, but they can't because Clarice is a small, diminutive woman in a man's world. Lecter wants to eat people. James Gunn, he wants to skin people and wear their bodies. It's like
That's it.
that's the unspoken stuff. We're talking about subtext in Cape Fear, but I think it melds better with the surface level things that you see in this movie than Cape Fear does. I think
I think you're right. I think Silence of the Lambs has a screenplay and performances and direction that is more clear about what it wants to say, out loud, what it wants to keep as subtext, what it wants to keep subconscious. I think it has better control over itself. And I think that if you told me, hey man, they had to write the screenplay 12 times, or this is 12 different things to get to Cape Fear, I'd be like, yeah, that kind of makes sense.
right.
And also, like, I think we're underplaying the fact that one of these movies has a very clear protagonist. Clarice Starling is a protagonist.
Exactly. And we like her.
Like pretty much the classic archetype, right? She's the sort of, she pulls the sword from the stone and goes in this thing and isn't prepared to face the challenges and has to find herself along the way. She literally goes into like a cave, it's a storage unit, but it's like she's almost mythological. Her whole plot line is basically, I think by the end of the movie, she's at a ball. She's Cinderella.
Yeah.
Like it's like it's a paint by numbers sort of classic protagonist story that's just set in this extraordinarily weird, twisted fairy tale.
Right. She descends into hell twice
Twice.
to visit the serial killer.
That's
The
right.
shot of Hopkins standing there, we already know all this stuff, and it's infinitely more horrifying that he already knows she's coming and that he's waiting for her than anything we could have possibly imagined. My question for you, and you did touch on this in your episode, is it a flaw of the movie that Hopkins is so charismatic that we just want to go back to him instead of focusing on the Buffalo Bill stuff?
I don't remember what I said, so I'll probably contradict myself. I don't know. I think part of the charm or part of that is part of it is again we are experiencing, I think, what our protagonist is experiencing, which is there's an allure to Lecter,
Mhm.
and she both needs him and wants to use him. But where Clarice, I think, is a little bit smarter than us. After a while, she's not initially as clued in. After a while, she kind of becomes immune to the charm.
Mhm.
And I don't know that we do as an audience really, which is why I think that scene exists of him beating that guy to death and ripping his face off and hanging him up in a crucifix. I
Mhm.
think like they know story mechanic wise, we've got to get the audience off board with Lecter. Clarice is already off of him by then, right? Like
Mhm.
she's just using him to get what she wants
Right.
by that point, which also kind of is a reversal of their relationship and he can't really fault her for it.
Right. He quid pro quos her still to get.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, but that's also like his way of saying like, yeah, it's his. It's just such a. I understand that. I totally understand the impulse to want to go back and be like, let's explore the relationship between these two characters because there's so much left unexplored, unsaid.
Mhm.
That's also what makes it so powerful.
Yeah.
So I think even if they had been able to get Jodie Foster to come back in the early 2000s, I think her instinct was right. Actually, it wasn't even her instinct; she just wanted more money. But I
That's an
think that,
instinct.
yeah, well, yeah, I think that's wrong. I think the fact that we don't really know, like, is there what is the attraction between them? Does he want to eat her, or does he love her, or does both? Or is he sexually aroused by her? Because he kind of says that he is, which is why like she's the type he has a type and she would fit his type. And we never get the sense she's sexually attracted to him, but she is attracted to him. Is she attracted to him because he can advance her career, or is she attracted to him because she's fascinated by the way his mind works, or both? And we
Or
never really know that. Who's
yeah.
using who in this relationship? We'd never really know.
Well,
They're
it's
both kind of using each other, but also there's a kind of purity in their relationship. It's
yeah.
very strange.
It's the unsaid that makes it more fascinating.
Yeah.
Ending the Hannibal book with them running off together is like that's not where I wanted the story to go. That's not where it needed. I didn't need to see it go there. It ended where it needed to end. I don't need to see all this other stuff.
What about
Uh,
him chopping his own hand off to
oh my
save her
god.
life, and then feeding Ray Liotta's brains to a kid on
Right.
an airplane?
Well, Hannibal's Grand Guignol, it's not this. It's a completely different movie, and you can dislike it.
Ridley
They're not the
Scott,
same.
baby, Ridley
Yeah,
Scott.
they're not the same. They're not even trying to be the same. I think the difference when you go back to Red Dragon, I think Red Dragon is a very sterile, kind of empty. Brett Ratner is a good chameleon. He can copy what
It's him
people
trying to
do.
be Demme.
Yeah, but it
Yeah.
doesn't work. You load your cast with Edward Norton and Anthony
What if I
Hopkins is in
remade
there.
my Michael Mann movie as Jonathan Demme? And
Right.
yeah,
But
yeah.
it's clean and you walk out of Red Dragon okay. Like you don't have a care in the world. And that's wrong for a movie about serial killers. I think the difference
I don't know. I kind of like Red Dragon.
it's entertaining, but it's not
I prefer
this.
it to Hannibal.
Yeah, well, it's an entertainment. But what I mean is when you're watching a movie about serial killers, it should not be a feel good movie because the way Scott Glenn, when he was doing his research, the actual FBI, they gave him access to tape recordings of victims being murdered and tortured, and it just brought him to tears, and it even turned his thoughts on the death penalty. It was that disturbing to him, and so
Mm.
these serial killers are notoriously like you don't want to be a part of that world. In Red Dragon, everything kind of ends and it's happy. And oh, Clarice is in the room and we can continue on. And Cape Fear also, it's like they're trying to make this entertainment in a way. And that's part of what makes the movie kind of repulsive because you should be entertained by this.
Yeah.
I just think at the end, yeah, it's weird that we're kind of happy that Lecter escapes and he's going to go eat Chilton for lunch, right? But it's so quiet the way he walks off, like you said. The camera just lets him go and it doesn't follow him because we're letting him do his thing. We're not part of it. But
we're ascending out of hell. We're leaving hell.
Right. And that's just masterful.
It is. Yeah. It's a masterful movie for sure.
Right. So yeah, but there's you can go either. There's no problem. There's nothing wrong with doing horror as entertainment. There's no problem with doing horror as a lesson to learn. It's
sure.
I just wanted to talk about both of these movies because they're fascinating from the director's point of view, but also what those directors are trying to say with this genre.
Sure.
And I think there's a reason why, other than Simpsons, I think there's a reason why people talk about Silence of the Lambs, but don't talk about Cape Fear. Silence of the Lambs is a movie that was made to last, and I think Cape Fear was just a movie to make $100 million and let Scorsese go on and do Casino and do all these other things. It's not a stepping stone in his career other than getting him his next job. So
you heard it here, YouTube. D.W. Lundberg says Cape Fear -5 stars stinks.
Exactly. I don't know how you could read that differently.
It stinks.
It stinks. Well, Jason, I know that it's late. I really appreciate you coming in and talking about these movies. This is exactly where I wanted this conversation to go.
Did I stick to your syllabus?
You did. And in a way that was in a way that I can still call this NostalgiaCast when we're done.
There you go.
Yeah. But yeah, I think when you talk about if you're going to pick Cape Fear and Silence of the Lambs, you need to kind of go to these places because that's what the movies are doing. You don't want to kind of soft pedal or half-ass the conversations on those.
No.
And that's why I wanted to chat with you. Again, like I said, I want to DM you all the time with compliments, but you never take them. So my thing is I look at my podcasting life and the connections that I've made. Again, Johnny, my best friend, being able to just start this with him and make those connections past, getting our voices out there. I remember listening to your podcast, and I've said this to you before, and thinking, this guy, like, there's no way I could ever chat with this guy. And then one day you invited me on, and then one day we're having a conversation, and then I was on again defending Casablanca for like 15 times. And then I was finally on one of their top movies episodes that I've always wanted to be a part of. I feel so incredibly lucky to have Brian Scuttle and have Robert Yanis Jr. and have Megan Kearns and have Molly Raspberry and have all Lindsay Washburn, have all these people that earns your circle, also be able to connect with them. I'm just so incredibly grateful and so incredibly grateful for these conversations that I've had. And that's why, again, for me, it's like I said, it's a cheat, but it was a bucket list to get you on again to have a conversation with you. I applaud you, sir.
Thank you. It was a bucket list item to actually do your show right instead of just rambling.
I appreciate that. Okay, well, we'll let you go to sleep. Where can people find you, and what is the Slashers up to? What is Binge Movies up to?
Oh, you can find Binge Movies, where we rank and review movies, on all of your favorite podcast platforms. All the good, the bad, and the ugly. The Slashers is I don't know, it's a podcast, but it's sort of BBC style, where we'll do some episodes, may go away for a few years, we come back and do some more episodes. And right now, what it's been about is the golden age of the slashers, which is we're defining it roughly as 1980 to 1984, but we're getting ready to do our second season. So we've covered not everything, but we covered quite a few. And the slashers that we cover run the gamut from the tried and true faithful that have endured the test of time, that people still watch every Halloween or watch all year long, your Freddy's, your Jason's, your whatnot. We've covered those, but we've also gone to a lot of shot on Shittio slasher movies. We've done a lot of regional drive-in slasher films. And now for our second season, I think I can announce this. I don't know if I have anywhere, but I've announced that we're doing a second season. I don't think I've said what it's going to be. We're doing 1985 to 1989. Mm-hmm. So we're doing the back half of the decade. And whatever became of the slasher? That's the question that we're asking is, what became of this thing? Yeah, we know that it had this golden age, But here's something we're gonna do that's gonna be a little bit different, and I'm sure it's gonna piss people off. Is we're not covering the sequels.
Oh, okay.
So we're not doing Nightmare 2, 3, 4, 5. We're not doing Friday 2, 3, 4, 5, on and on and on. Because one, Paul and I have already done all those movies. It's not to say that we wouldn't do those movies again as the slashers, but what you end up with is like 2 or 3 franchises, basically 2, that put out a movie every single year.
Yeah.
For the rest of the decade, and they kind of suck up all the money and the energy and the consciousness to this day. And all of the other slashers sort of fade away. Yeah. And we're going to try to figure out why, right?
Yeah.
You know, when we're making Friday 7 to diminishing returns and Nightmare 8, why, there wasn't 8 at that point, but still, like, why aren't we getting anything that's sort of, what happened to those other slashers?
Yeah.
What happened to the ones that we don't talk about anymore? What happens to, like, I brought it up in this episode, a Psycho 3? You know, I mean, why don't we talk about that one very much, right?
Yeah.
We went from having, at the first part of the decade, like all of these kind of one-offs. You know, you got Motel Hell. We never got a Motel Hell 3 or 4 or 5 or 2, as far as I know.
Yeah.
You know, so why not? Why does the rest of the decade become so franchise heavy? And then what the hell else was all going on in that decade?
Right.
So that's what we're doing.
I'm super glad those sequels are beneath you and you're avoiding the redundancy. That you're saying this is like, whoa, that's cool. Like, let's talk about something that's more interesting.
And so we're trying to push it a little bit more international, which we did the first time. We had some international slasher movies. So we're trying to get it out of America. And to be honest with you, we're talking about some movies as we get through our viewing as a team. It's myself and Paul from The Countdown, and Megan Kearns from Spoiler Piece Theater.
Perfect partners.
Amongst many other things. We're 3 wildly diverse people with wildly diverse perspectives about movies and life and politics and everything else. So you put us into a room, so there's going to be laughter and tears and fighting and all kind of stuff to explore this genre. And if you haven't found season 1, go find it. We start with a prologue where we talk about the origins of these things. We have an epilogue, and we have some great episodes in between. And we're going to be back later this summer with a brand new season.
Awesome.
So this first season we put out right around Halloween, and this time we're going to put out a little bit before, so it can kind of stand on its own and not just get sucked up into the horror echo chamber.
Awesome. Well, I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah.
All right.
I'm excited about it for sure. Thank you so much for having me on and letting me pimp my products.
Oh, anytime. I appreciate that. Okay. Awesome. Yeah. Everybody check out Binge Movies. Great. Like I said, great conversations over there that really give you not the sound bite, that give you the whole picture, the whole spiel. That's what we're missing. It feels so, it's like eating your vegetables. I know that sounds bad, but it's like, yeah, I get all this meat and stuff, but
what a pitch.
Yeah, here's the stuff that builds me up from the inside.
Like eating your vegetables.
Your bloody vegetables.
That's right.
So yeah, please go check out Binge Movies. Check out that first season of the Slashers. Watch for that second season. Jason, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it as always.
It's an honor.
And in the immortal words of Hannibal Lecter, thank you, Jason. Thank you.
That's creepy, Derry.